What is Diavolo like as a person? Mysteries and hype aside, what real-life type of human being is he meant to be a message for? Or at least, what does he seem to represent? To start, Diavolo is an evil Josuke Higashikata. He's based on a bad real-life type of berserker who loses their sense of reason because they're not capable enough to compete with others when keeping calm and using their head. Like how Josuke is an example of how someone can still be a strong hero when they're not able to cool down and critically think through impossible circumstances the way Jotaro can. Josuke is the protagonist of Part 4, so the main thing he relies on for power, being a support role for a wider society that can collectively fight for the common good, is withheld from the protagonist of Part 5, which is why Giorno lives in a corrupt society and needs to go against the grain, taking on a leadership role where he creates new lives for people and protects them against existing ones instead of restoring what's already there. Josuke is allowed to be a berserker. The world gives him a chance to let his blind aggression power what he does. But for Giorno, it might be impossible because the wider world that his autonomy depends on might not give him a way out. So he perseveres through that and critically looks for solutions despite the possibility of everything being rigged. Because in each JoJo part after Stardust Crusaders, the advantages the previous main character relied on to solve problems are withheld from the new protagonist and given to the new main villain. As the opposite of Giorno Giovanna, Diavolo is someone who gives up critically thinking through obstacles because he thinks that even fair fights are too risky. So instead, he tries to prepare for the next fight in advance and sabotage any potential opponents outside of it, as he then buries his true feelings and forgets what really matters to him, so he can concede the current fight without being truly vulnerable or losing anything. It's kind of like bunting in baseball. If you're awkward and not sharp or stable enough to stand up for yourself, then when somebody antagonizes you or life throws some kind of trial or conflict at you, an easy way out is to learn to let yourself lose while burying the things you actually care about so deeply that even someone sharper than you can't tell there's something else you're trying to protect from them. Once you do this, you're forgetting and losing sight of whatever you've buried in your heart. So you try to engrave it and make it frantic enough that your feelings for it build up and subconsciously fuel what you do at every chance they get. And you let this engraved desire decide your awareness from setting to setting, going forward. So now, you're an awkward and clumsy guy people can pick on, but when you truly have space to think to yourself, your goal can come back to you, and your whole personality will frantically prioritize and plan around it. The only problems are that when you're in public again, you'll forget and might accidentally sabotage your true desire, and when you're in that frantic state where you have room to breathe and zero disadvantages, it's the only thing you'll care about. So if anything shows up while vulnerable, it might be subjected to whatever you're like when you're single-mindedly driven with zero consideration for humanity or the well-being of others. A real-life example I know feels guilt over squishing or bothering bugs when they're at work or at home. But they have a specific fort they retreat to whenever they like to think to themselves or decompress, where they've put tarps over all the windows and obstacles in the entryway. And in here, without the guilt even occurring to them, whenever they find a bug crawling around, even if it's a massive beetle, they'll seal it in any available clear plastic container and watch it with a sort of absent curiosity to see how long it can survive over the next couple weeks, like a morbid terrarium that reaffirms their isolation and security whenever it's in view. Because the reckless way they've wired their habits to be able to contest with people who are more capable and flexible than them has split their cares and awareness between different settings. Everything supernatural and mysterious about Diavolo's backstory can be explained as basic JoJo mechanics exaggerating the life of someone who has the opportunities to be able to acquire power and get away with using this faulty method of solving problems. First, as a kid, he's born after a 2-year pregnancy, where he never indicated to his mother's prison guards that he was in there. For all we know, given the kinds of sleight of hand people can pull off in JoJo, his mother could have kept the pregnancy secret on purpose, and classic JoJo misdirection made it physically harder to see. It's the 2 years that are tougher to explain. But while this might just be a coincidence, the only real-life cases I know of people with Diavolo's tendency, and there are multiple, never had natural births. Because in the womb, contractions or something never happened, so they kept growing in there past due until it got too risky to their doctors and they had to be extracted via C-section. Now, I'm not an expert in childbirth. I couldn't tell you if the baby curses the mother or if it's the other way around. But given this is supposed to represent how Diavolo's born into the world with the opportunity to get away with being a mess, I think the most likely explanation would be that while his soul in a way helps lead to this scenario through destiny, part of how this opportunity manifests is that his mother just doesn't have contractions for 2 years because nobody steps in to deliver the baby earlier. And to exaggerate the effect, her water doesn't break at all, and she might even have no idea that she's having a baby. But either way, she gives no indication of being pregnant until the time limit is reached. Now this is just an anime-only detail, but fitting at least one of those examples I know, when someone is born past due and through C-section, it's more common for them to have some hair already and not cry during the process. And for this example, people thought they'd get a weird look in their eye. So maybe the anime adaptation wanted to draw a comparison to this type of birth for some kind of pattern, because of some kind of trend with the babies who are born this way. I could not tell you. In any case, what we see of adolescent Diavolo fits this personality trait as well. He stumbles and makes a mess of himself. While feeling genuine embarrassment when eyes are on him, he casually and habitually uses pseudonyms to distance his genuine self whenever possible, even when getting lost in his feelings that might be counterproductive to his deeper goals. And then he does a complete 180 and only cares about those goals to a malicious degree when he's in his element, with those goals being to thrive and to keep his genuine self buried. At some point, his vulnerable and desperate mother confronts him without his foster father's knowledge, and just like with the Beatles in that one example, he seals her away in a personal space so he can bury anything about himself and keep his vulnerabilities isolated. And when he reaches a crossroad between betraying that impulse and doubling down, he embraces the opportunity to give himself a fresh start and remove all traces to who he is. Then it's either through this extreme commitment or awakening his stand that through Jojo's mechanics, he fully splits into 2 separate souls. A caricature of his younger self, whose awareness warps around whatever he needs, and who acts like a berserker relying on his guidance, but who's also completely reliant on and supportive of him even when fully lucid. And then Diavolo himself, fully reborn as the inner agenda he used to rely on back when he had to be his own shell, as though now he's truly a devil. Awakening King Crimson gives him the agency to take his old method of solving problems to the next level. The stand is about how he can snowball power by tuning out the current issue, looking for the next fight in advance, and rigging things by pushing for his victory when nobody else is looking, which comes in 2 halves. There's the way his shell consciously tries to pay attention to the future, but can't really do anything in a struggle, so he goes berserk by mentally checking out and relies on his inner drive to guide him to victory, which is represented by Epitaph. And then there's the way his inner self can watch what's going on from its own safe space and wait for safe opportunities to emerge so he can take significant actions when he's safe to without anyone else's awareness, slip back under his shell, engineer more of these opportunities to happen for him, and watch from the shadows for the next one, which is represented by the time erasure. To engineer more of these opportunities, he creates a crime syndicate and takes over a nation, so he can break the rules whenever he sees an opportunity, imposing on the lives of civilians, and then balance it for himself by covering up what he does, imposing on the lives of those civilians further. King Crimson is his advantage to accomplish this. The problem with this method of solving problems is that you're sacrificing your awareness and turning a desire into an agenda that doesn't have any moderation, and that you won't reevaluate because you're turning yourself into a shell that unquestionably allows some forgotten agenda within it to rearrange its emotions, what it recalls, what it cares about, and what it focuses on whenever that buried, single-minded inner voice sees an opportunity. Which means you're abandoning your accountability. It doesn't inherently make you a villain, but you could do pretty twisted things or gain pretty twisted priorities because of you enabling it to warp your awareness around it. And it sets a bad precedent, because if you're able to get away with it, then you're enabled to completely operate out of self-interest using an oppressive method without any restraint or moderation. Someone could be born with Diavolo's tendencies and not turn into a villain because they've been humbled and forced to develop a more responsible way of dealing with unavoidable risks. They're supposed to fill roles in a fable, but the main villains of Jojo aren't villains for the traits that embody their roles. Diavolo's only a villain because his destiny is to snowball a tendency he's born to have until it makes him the worst version of himself possible, and then never be anything more, because this tendency of bunting overwhelming obstacles but letting his inner feelings hijack his actions is what he falls back into when Giorno gets his hand on the arrow thanks to Trish's provocation. So his ability to get away with this tactic for his whole life blinds him and guarantees his demise.